What's going on, guys? I'm Matt from SBFishingTV here with Carl's Bait and Tackle. Today we're going to go over how I fish plastic jerk minnows in the fall to catch big, giant transitioning bass. So we've got a few different jerk minnows that we're going to be working with today. So we're calling them jerk minnows. They're also known as just paddle tail swim baits, or soft plastic swim baits, and they range in size from like a 4-inch big bite baits jerk minnow to an 8-inch Kitech. But these are all 4 to 4.5 inches. This is what we're going to be working with today, and there's so many different ways that you can fish these. One of my favorite things about them is that they're so versatile. Like, you can fish them weightless, you can fish them on a jig head, an underspin, a chatterbait. You can even fish one on a football head jig, which is something else that I'm going to do today. So quickly, let's take a look at these baits. Let's see what we're working with. And first up we have the Big Bite Baits jerk minnow. As you can see, this is a pretty small 4-inch paddle tail finesse swim bait. It's really soft plastic. This tail just kicks just enough. It gives it a tiny bit of action, but really this thing isn't going too crazy. And one of my favorite ways to fish this is on a Ned rig style jig head, just like this. So this is for when the fishing gets a bit tough, when they're not eating bigger baits and when you can really only get them to eat this dragged along the bottom. And what I do is I just thread it straight on. And this is a really small hook. This is like the 1/5 ounce Ned head. And I literally just rig it just like this. And you can fish it directly on the bottom and just drag it, and it just looks like a little minnow or a shad just eating right off the bottom. Or you can just reel it straight back to the boat, kind of suspended in the water column. That also works really well. So one of the key things that you want to look for when to throw these, you want to find bait, you want to find shad, you want to find minnows, you want to find an area that has a concentration of bait just like this. And especially in the fall, you're going to generally see bigger shad, but there are going to be times when you see the smaller ones schooled up in the backs of creeks or out on big main lake flats. And that's when this little guy comes into play. Or also if you have like a cold front that comes through in the fall and you think that the fish just want something a bit smaller. But generally in the fall, I'm going to be throwing something a little bit bigger, a little bit beefier. The fish are getting ready for winter, so they want something big, and they're crushing these massive shad, which are going to be their main forage, especially like during that transition into the fall. But that's where this Excite Baits Shad Nasty comes in. And I'm going to throw this most likely on like a football head jig, an underspin, or even on the back of a chatterbait. And something that I really like to do on the back of if I'm throwing it on a chatterbait, is take the skirt off completely. So it's almost like fishing a scrounger head on the chatterbait, but it's just this bare, the chatterbait blade in the front. It works really, really well. So something a little bit different with the Excite Baits Shad Nasty is this thing is actually extremely buoyant and it floats. You're going to be able to throw this on a football head jig and just drag it across the bottom, and that tail is just going to stand straight up and just paddle right behind the jig, bringing a ton of action and just something a little bit different than most of the paddle tail swim baits, because as we know, most of these are sinking. They're filled with salt, they're just a little bit heavier, but the way they designed this is so it floats. So that's something a little bit different. I've actually never thrown this. I'm really excited to throw this around and see what kind of action this has. So last but not least, we're going to take a look at the Biospawn Exo Swim. So this is something that I fish all the time. Just like the other ones, I'm going to fish this on a chatterbait or an underspin, something like the rear loader swing jig. And again, you can fish this anywhere in the water column. You can drag it on the bottom. You can fish it for suspended fish. You can burn it. You can slow roll it. There's just so much that you can do with these jerk minnows, which is why they're just awesome to throw, especially in the fall, especially because this is what the fish are keying in on. They're keying in on the shad. They're finding them shallow, deep, and that's something else as to why these baits are so good in the fall, because you need to be versatile. You need to fish deep, you need to fish shallow. These fish are kind of scattered all over the lakes and rivers. They're not yet super shallow, especially during the transition, and some of them are still kind of in their summertime areas, like off deep points or break lines and ledges. So these things are definitely going to do well today, but we're going to rig a couple of these up in different ways. I'm going to show you how I fish them, and hopefully we can get on some fish. First things first, when it comes to fishing these jerk minnows, you need to realize what you're fishing. You're fishing a shad imitating bait, so you want to fish it as a shad would swim. So you're going to think about when you see a shad, either skimming its way across the top of the water, or if you see a big ball of them kind of just scattering around, they're usually swimming pretty erratically. So I fish this with a lot of like rips of the rod. I'm constantly hopping it, pausing it, reeling it as fast as I can, and then killing it. You just really want to imitate what a shad looks like. That being said, you also can catch fish dragging these around on the bottom. I really don't think there's a lot of times that shad are just kind of belly down on the bottom, slowly swimming, but when the bite's really tough, you do need to do that. But I find that most of the time fishing these plastic jerk minnows a little bit more erratically, you're gonna get bit more. So when it comes to fishing it on the swinging jig, I mean, I'm casting this thing out, I'll let it sink to the bottom and I'll reel it along the bottom, but generally I'm gonna fish it pretty erratically. If I'm fishing the really small finesse jerk minnow on the Ned head, I'm definitely gonna be dragging that along, but still giving it little hops and twitches here and there so it looks like a little feeding shad on the bottom. Keep that in mind when you're fishing these. You know, you just really want the fish to think that they're eating a real shad, so keep that in mind. Areas that I'm gonna throw these, pretty much everywhere, especially in the fall. You want to cover as much water as possible. These fish are going to be scattered everywhere. They're going to be deep, they're going to be shallow. A lot of the fish are still going to be in that transition, so you need to fish all of the areas, and these are some of the best baits you can be throwing because they're keying in on shad so heavily this time of year. But keep that in mind when you're out there, and just switch it up, cover a lot of water, fish them in as many different ways as possible. You know, throw them on the underspin, throw them on the swinging jig, throw it on the Ned head. Just see what the fish want. But places that you definitely want to fish them: main lake flats, like big feeding flats next to deep water. Fish them on points, you know, sharp points, and then really long tapering points are some of my favorite. Make sure you check the creeks all the way to the back too, because a lot of times these shad, especially when the water starts getting colder, will push all the way into the backs of the creeks. And besides that, you know, just cover as much water as you can, fish a lot of the lake, keep the trolling motor on high, and just keep running around till you find fish. So one thing I like to do when I'm fishing it on the swinging jig is, if I'm fishing a transition area where it's a flat and then it drops off, basically try to follow the contour with the jig. There we go. Oh wow. If this is another catfish, I don't know what to say. Oh, that's a good bass. There we go. There we go. All right. Well, as I was talking about following the contour of the lay of the lake, kind of off of that point, this one absolutely crushed it. Just letting it sink to the bottom, started to slowly reel it back. And that was the Excite Baits Shad Nasty with a swinging jig head. But that's a solid fish right there. That's the one we were looking for. He's like 2.5 pounds. Really solid on the back side of a point. We've just been covering water, looking for shad. We've seen a bunch of bait everywhere, but the points seem to be holding a lot of the fish today. So that's a solid fish. See you, bud. But as I was saying just a second ago before that fish decided to bite, you want to follow the contour with the bait just like a foot above it. So if you know you have like a break line halfway between you and the boat, cast up to the bank and then start slowly reeling it back about a foot off the bottom, and then kind of kill it where you think that break line is, so it just slowly follows it down. And then you can wait till it either hits the bottom, or you can start reeling right when you think you're at about the bottom of that break line. And you can catch a lot of fish that way just because of the way that the fish are going to be positioning themselves on the break line. And if you're bringing this bait right down into their face instead of directly over them, sometimes if they're being lazy, they're not going to want to go up and eat. If you just bring it down that break line, just drop it slowly in front of their face, they will absolutely hammer it. Alright guys, we're going to try out the Big Bite Baits jerk minnow on the Ned head for a little bit. The bite hasn't been exactly amazing. That last fish that we caught on the Excite Baits Shad Nasty was pretty good, but that's definitely the best fish that I've had all day and the strongest bite. But I really think we can catch some good fish on this, so we're going to throw it around for a little bit. Conditions like this, like it's just been raining and nasty all day, huge cold front coming through, that's the time you want to throw a bait like this, especially in the fall. And again, normally I'm throwing bigger baits in the fall, but sometimes you need to downsize when you have these cold fronts come through, the fish get lockjaw, or they just want a smaller bait in general. So keep that in mind. We're gonna throw this around a bit, see if we can't get bit. Here we go. On the jerk shad. He hammered it too. So that fish hit it on the initial fall. It's right at the end of that tree there. And that's definitely a prime area for fall fish. Kind of halfway back into a creek, deep out on a piece of wood, just waiting for a small shad to swim by. And I was watching my line, it just stopped a little bit too early, you know, probably 4 seconds into that fall, and I was like, wait a second, it's 20 feet right here. Man, that thing got him good. There you go. It's a little one, he's probably about a pound, nothing crazy. But man, he really wanted to go. There you have it. Oh God, hammered it. All right, that's the Dobbins jig with the Exo Swim right there. That fish absolutely annihilated this thing. I'm on the backside of a windy point, and I'm basically just fishing this like a swim bait. It's just really beefy. Virtually, this is the same thing as like the swing jig too. You know, you're fishing it kind of suspended. But I'm also gonna flip this. You know, if you don't think that a fish is gonna eat this if you flip it into a tree, then you should probably try it, because I promise you they will. So you're gonna flip it in like you would any sort of flipping jig and then just swim it back to the boat. You can catch a ton of fish that way, but that's another really awesome way to fish one of these swim and jerk minnows, especially with that football jig. I'm gonna keep fishing this around this point a little bit. See if we can't catch any more, hopefully. So another really good spot to throw this football head jig with the Exo Swim would be in areas that have really heavy cover. So this is gonna get through that really easily, especially because the jig has a weed guard on it, obviously. But also the fish are gonna see this thing and you're gonna be able to give them the business and just really be able to horse them out of that cover, because you're fishing it on a heavier rod. You wanna fish it on your flip and stick, or you know, a good 7/6 medium heavy rod. I'm fishing that with 20-pound fluorocarbon, high-speed gear ratio reel, and you know, you're really just able to get those fish to the boat and out of that cover when you need to. That's gonna be it for me today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you take these soft plastic jerk minnows, go out this fall and catch some gigantic bass on them. Throw them on the football head jig, throw them on your swinging jig, throw them on a finesse rig. Try a bunch of different things. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on Carl's Mystery Tackle Box, and I'll see y'all on the next one.